In this video, we'll be looking at Fujifilm's updated kit lens. Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be offering you my thoughts on the updated kit lens from Fujifilm, the XF16 to 50mm f2.8 to f4.8. Now initially I had no interest in this lens at all, but I purchased a copy to write a lens guide for the Fujilove magazine, which if you're not subscribed to, you really should be. I'll leave a link below. Anyway, I ended up really enjoying the experience of working with this tiny lens, so in this video I'd like to chat about the lens, compare it briefly to my Sigma 18 to 50mm f2.8, and let you know which one of the two that I'll be keeping. I actually unknowingly bought this lens from a viewer of the channel. He'd bought it with a kit and was selling it by itself as he didn't need it, so a shout out to you, sir. As with Fujifilm's previous 18 to 50mm kit lens, the pricing of this lens really only makes sense if you buy it as part of a kit. Now, sold separately, it comes in at around $700 US, and if I were paying that much, I'd save a little more and just splash for the XF 16 to 55mm f2.8, or maybe go for Sigma's 18 to 50mm, which has the constant aperture. Now, in a kit, it runs around $400, which is a much easier pill to swallow. So I'll be coming from that perspective in this video. Now, with that out of the way, let's have a chat about the lens itself. The build of this lens is very much in line with Fujifilm's modern lenses. It feels good in the hand, it uses good quality materials, and has the finishes that we expect from an XF lens. Now, as with almost all XF lenses, it does have a physical aperture ring, which is really great to see. However, just like its predecessor and some lenses like the XF 10 to 24mm f4, it is a free spinning aperture ring that doesn't allow you to set it while the camera is turned off, and occasionally is just a little bit inaccurate with the number of clicks that it registers. Now, that's not a huge deal, but it's a very different feeling from the premium XF lenses that I use for work. Possibly the best new design feature of this lens is that it no longer telescopes out when zooming. So the inner barrel of the lens moves inside the lens, but it doesn't extend beyond the front of the lens. Aside from the ease of being able to stow the lens in your bag at any focal length, the other benefit this brings is that it's now a fully weather-resistant design. Now, this is great for peace of mind when the rain starts coming down, especially when paired with a weather-resistant camera body like the X-T5. Now, since the inner barrel of the lens does still move in and out when you're zooming, I have paired this with a nice B&W UV filter to ensure that nothing can get sucked in as the lens moves back and forth. So in a nutshell, the build quality of this lens feels more in line with Fujifilm's newer lenses than the old kit zoom did, and the only real downside to it is that free spinning aperture ring, but of course that's a personal thing and it may not bother you. The original XF 18 to 55mm had great autofocus and it was really nothing to complain about, but this new one is just that little bit snappier. Now, I've got no way to really measure that, but it can be hard to notice it focusing most of the time. It just seems to already be in place when you press the shutter. So it can be a little bit slower in low light, and by that I mean that you can sort of notice it focusing, but even then I haven't found it to be a problem. So really good work on this one, Fujifilm. In this review, we'll merge the two image quality sections and go rapid fire. This is a kit lens, and we're not going to dissect the image quality too much here. That's really not what you invest in a kit lens for. It's not what they're about. It does a great job overall and is fit for purpose. It's not going to compete with the high-end primes that I use for work, but that's not what it's meant to do. What it does do is provide really good image quality at a variety of useful focal lengths. Wide open at any focal length, the center of the frame is really good. I'd say that it's not really worth stopping the lens down for anything other than depth of field if you're mostly looking for detail in the center of the frame. I'll get to some comparisons with other lenses at the end of this section, but for now, there's really not a huge difference between f2.8 and f8 in the central area of the frame. As for the corners, these vary a little more with focal length. They're not bad at any zoom setting, but there are some differences. Corners are a little soft wide open at the 16mm end, but they do get better as the lens is stopped down, and by f5.6 they're very usable. As the lens is zoomed in, the corners get better and better the further you zoom. Now, presumably this is partly due to the smaller aperture at the long end of the lens, and also partly to do with the fairly heavy software corrections that we see going on at the wide end of the lens. Still, the corners are very good for a tiny zoom lens like this. while we might not consider this lens to be a bokeh machine, shallow depth of field is certainly possible, especially when working in close, and the bokeh is smooth and pleasant in my experience. Now, in addition to this sample, there are a couple more coming up in the field section, as well as in the slideshow at the end of the video. There is a tiny bit of CA visible from time to time in extremely high contrast situations, but outside of directly trying to make it happen, I haven't seen it appear in any of my images. So we can say that this lens is very well corrected for CA. This lens also seems to have all the lovely goodness that Fujifilm has been adding to its coatings recently, and does very, very well in terms of flare and ghosting. I haven't seen much of either at any time when using the lens, so great work, Fujifilm. Sunstars are possible with this lens formula, and they're the kind that I mostly like to work with in my images. They're not too defined and don't take over the images, but they're also not sloppy and messy looking. Finally, I'll give you a few quick thoughts here to do with the other options on the market. Now, I dug up some old photos from my collection from the original kit lens, and honestly, I feel like it's a fairly simple comparison with this lens. Now, the newer lens feels a little bit sharper and more contrasty at all focal lengths, and of course the old lens does give you that extra 2/3 of a stop of light on the long end, and also that slightly longer long end, but the new lens does get you a little bit wider on the short end, so much of a muchness there, and you can really decide what suits your photography. The new lens also doesn't have image stabilization, but with the majority of Fujifilm's newer bodies including IBIS anyway, this wouldn't really be an issue for a lot of people. But if your body doesn't have IBIS and you'd like stabilization, the old lens is of course the better option there. And of course, there's the Sigma lens. Now, here the standout differences are the f2.8 constant aperture that the Sigma offers, which is a really big bonus as you'll get much shallower depth of field on the long end, and you really don't need to worry about the exposure changing as you zoom in and out. But the XF lens has weather resistance and a physical aperture ring, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section. Now, in terms of detail rendered, they're very similar. The Fujifilm lens has slightly softer central area at the extreme ends of the zoom, but slightly sharper images in the middle of the range. Corners are slightly better on the wide end of the Sigma lens, but the Fujifilm seems to be a hair better on the long end. Now, these are really small differences, and I wouldn't pick one lens over the other because of them. I had to zoom in all the way and scrutinize to even see the differences. In day-to-day shooting, you're really not going to see much of a difference. Finally, there's the Fujifilm zoom ring, which is in line with all of Fujifilm's other lenses, while the Sigma rotates in the opposite direction. Now, I've mentioned this before, much to the ire of people who don't really care, but for me, using a lot of different lenses all the time, it's a really big trip up every time I want to zoom a lens to have to rotate it the other way. There's just one more lens I want to talk about, and it's not a zoom lens. It's the XF 16mm f2.8. Now, that's a fantastic lens for its size, but it relies heavily on software corrections and has quite soft corners at any aperture. So, if you're looking to get better detail in the corners of your images, this kit lens is a better option, and you still get f2.8 at the wide end, making it effectively the same lens, but with the ability to zoom when you want to. As I talked about in my full review of the Sigma 18-50mm, my main uses for a compact zoom like this are scouting for my clients and shooting the photo wall at corporate events. Now, for these purposes, I don't need the finest quality primes with fast apertures. What I need is versatility, and this lens definitely provides that, just like the Sigma did. Now, one of the benefits of this lens that I didn't really think about when I first picked it up was just how great it is to have 16mm at the wide end of a zoom. I've actually started taking this lens out with me cycling, and when I go to the seaside in place of my XF 16mm f2.8. It produces sharper images than the prime and offers the ability to zoom when I'd rather not be working with a wide angle. That is, of course, the greatest strength of any zoom lens, getting access to a variety of focal lengths quickly without having to change lenses. That allows for a lot of different ways to visualize a scene very, very quickly. Now, 16mm might not seem like a huge difference from 18mm, but the possibilities that open up with the extra field of view in tight spaces, or the extra perspective distortion when working in close, make this quite distinct from the other kit zooms on the Fujifilm X system. One of my favorite days out with this lens was actually our first snow day of this winter past. I headed out to Gyeongbokgung, the main royal palace here in Seoul, in the hope of getting a few images. Now, I knew it was going to be crowded with tourists, but if I could get a few clear frames, I had a feeling that something really special might eventuate. With 16mm, I knew that I'd be able to shoot over the shoulders of others, or getting close enough that I wouldn't be able to see them anyway, and make use of the wide end of that lens. So I've got a few more images coming from this set in the slideshow, so do stick around for that. The light got much, much better for a few short moments on that day. It was also a good chance to put the lens on the X-T5 and have a weather-sealed package to work with. Now, I wouldn't need to swap lenses in the snow or worry about snow melting and getting inside the lens or between the lens and the body. This was great for some peace of mind that I don't get when working with the Sigma. On top of that, working with the physical aperture ring is so much easier than trying to turn the tiny dials on a Fujifilm camera when your fingers are so cold that they don't bend. The XF lens was absolutely wonderful to work with during these conditions. So far I've had this lens out in the snow, the driving rain, and on dusty and windy mountains during the depths of winter with no issues at all. So the weather sealing has, it seems, done its job, and I haven't been worried about this lens or the camera that's attached to at any time. Now, if there's anything that I'm not a huge fan of, it's the obvious annoyance of working with a variable aperture lens. Now, I haven't used a variable aperture lens in a very, very long time, and I'd forgotten just how cognizant of it you need to be. With the Sigma, I can have my aperture set to f2.8, just twist the zoom ring without having to worry that the exposure will change. Now, with the XF lens, there's a need to always be aware that adjustments might be needed if you zoom in or out. Of course, that also means that the lens isn't capable of the shallow depth of field that the Sigma is at the long end, but it's still certainly able to significantly blur backgrounds, as you can see here, if you're close enough to your subject. Speaking of zooming, I have noticed a curious effect with this lens and zooming in and out. Especially around the middle of the zoom range, I've noticed that the preview in the camera just changes exposure ever so slightly when zooming. This doesn't seem to be to do with the variable aperture, as it happens even when the camera is locked down in manual mode with a small aperture value selected. I'm wondering if maybe this is a fault with my copy, or if it's something that others have noticed. So if you do have a copy of this lens and you have seen it, do let me know in the comments below. While I've been testing this lens, it's basically been my add it to the bag when you leave home lens. And honestly, a lot of the time when I'm out for some casual photography, maybe with my wife or scouting for a client, it's been the only lens on my camera all day. If I don't need the shallowest depth of field, I've been happy to basically continue using this because the image quality it produces is really good, and there's been no reason to take it off the camera. So, the good image quality and the solid feeling build to this lens has basically given me the confidence I need to use it in any situation. The fact that it feels in line with Fujifilm's other lenses makes it a great partner for the fast primes that I use day in and day out for work. It still has that Fujifilm feel to it, but it doesn't ask you to take it too seriously like some of the more expensive primes do. It's a playful lens that allows you basically a lot of variety in a very small package. So, in my opinion, Fujifilm has really knocked this one out of the park. The lens is compact, it's light, it's got good image quality, it's weather sealed, it's got rapid autofocus, and the only thing that I might ask for would be a slightly faster aperture on the long end, even just f4 like the older lens. I think that I could take the lens being a little bit bigger and heavier as a trade-off for that, but it seems that Fujifilm's engineers couldn't. Overall, I've enjoyed the lens quite a bit more than I was expecting to. In fact, it's going to be the one that I keep, and the Sigma 18 to 50mm is going up for sale as soon as I've edited this video, despite my love for the constant aperture. The main reason for this, though, is to do with the usability of the lens. The two major complaints that I had about the Sigma in my review were the rotation direction of the zoom ring and the lack of an aperture ring, and the Fujifilm addresses both of these and feels a little bit more seamless when jumping back and forth between this and my other XF lenses. Now, on top of that, it has the internal zoom and the weather resistance. Now, those things, for my purposes, outweigh the constant aperture of the Sigma lens. Now, it's quite expensive, and as I said, I might not recommend buying this lens as a standalone, but if you do get it as part of a kit or can pick it up secondhand from someone who perhaps bought the kit and doesn't want the lens, it could be a really good deal, and I've got absolutely no qualms recommending it to anybody who needs a small and versatile zoom lens in their kit. Now, would I recommend upgrading to it from the old kit lens or switching to it if you're using the Sigma lens? No, absolutely not. Not unless there's a specific feature of this lens, like the 16mm wide end or the weather resistance, that might really benefit you. In terms of image quality, it's not a huge difference and it wouldn't be worth the upgrade. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this review and got what you came for, but please do ask any questions that you might have in the comments below and I'll try to get back to you. Please do also stick around for the slideshow and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers!